Hare Krishna. Today we're continuing the series on the successful student, and we didn't complete the class last time, which was class 1, so then this class becomes class 2 or part 2. So the first class we discussed what is education, and in this class we'll discuss qualifications of teacher and student. So we go to Bhagavad Gita today, chapter 4, text 34. Everybody should know this verse, should not have to refer to the database. Everybody knows this verse, right?
Yeah.
Freddie knows it?
Yeah.
Tadvidhi pranipatena pariprashnena sevaya upadekshanti te jnanam jnaninas tattvadarshanah tadvidhi pranipatena pariprashnena sevaya upadekshanti te jnanam jnaninas tattvadarshanah tadvidhi pranipatena pariprashnena sevaya upadekshanti te jnanam jnaninas tattvadarshanah. Tat, that knowledge of different sacrifices. Vidhi, try to understand. Pranipatena, by approaching a spiritual master. Pariprashnena, by submissive inquiries. Sevaya, by the rendering of service. Upadekshanti, they will initiate. Te, you. Jnanam, into knowledge. Jnanina, the self-realized. Tattva, of the truth. Darshana, seers. Lord Krishna speaking here to Arjuna, just try to learn the truth by approaching a spiritual master. Inquire from him submissively and render service unto him. The self-realized souls can impart knowledge unto you because they have seen the truth. Om Jnanatimirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshu Unmilitam Yena Tasma Shri Guruve Namaha. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasari Gaura Bhaktavinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare. We'll look at the purport for this verse as we go along. So now that we have an understanding of what education is and what a successful student is, we'll look at the two essential components of education, which are a qualified teacher and a qualified student. Maybe we just do a quick summary of the last class. Ultimately, a successful student is one who receives an education in Krishna Bhakti, because that king of education, which Krishna calls in the 9th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita Raja Vidya, or the king of education, has the potential to meet our ultimate need, which is to love God in his most attractive form as Sri Krishna. So we have this understanding now from Shastra, what it means to be a successful student and what education is. Now we want to look at the components of education the qualified teacher and the qualified student through the lens of the Bhagavad Gita, because the Bhagavad Gita gives us this classic example of both the qualified teacher and the qualified student through Krishna, the ideal teacher, and Arjuna, the ideal student. Throughout the Shastra, Srimad Bhagavatam and Chaitanya Charitamrita, you'll notice that this dynamic is there repeatedly. The qualified teacher, the qualified student. But the Bhagavad Gita, as Srila Prabhupada explains, is the preliminary study of Vedic wisdom, and it gives the example of Lord Krishna and Arjuna on the battlefield of Kurukshetra. It's a very unique situation in which to give and receive spiritual education. One would not immediately imagine that this would happen, that on a battlefield in between two armies who are huge armies, 640 million people in these armies. So in that situation, between these two huge armies about to fight, that the greatest spiritual education would be imparted and received. Very extraordinary, unusual and dynamic situation. And of course, Lord Krishna spoke the Bhagavad Gita to educate Arjuna in this situation on purpose. It was not by accident that Krishna just the universe just arranged that Krishna and Arjuna were there on the chariot, and by coincidence Arjuna just happened to inquire from Krishna, and Krishna just happened to speak the Bhagavad Gita. This is Krishna's arrangement. He speaks the Bhagavad Gita to Arjuna on purpose, meaning in that particular extraordinary situation, he speaks the Bhagavad Gita on purpose. He's showing that many things. He's showing many things by doing this. One is that real education is something that applies to real life. It applies in a very practical way. It's not simply some kind of theory or some kind of academic gobbledygook that you just learn to get some kind of vocation in this world, as we discussed in the last class. Real education is ultimately meant to solve all of our problems. And so in this very extreme situation where Arjuna's got such a inconceivable problem to solve, Krishna speaks the Bhagavad Gita to show that Bhagavad Gita applies, or in other words, real spiritual education applies in every circumstance in life. And it can solve the problems of life in every circumstance, in every time, in every place. If the Bhagavad Gita can solve Arjuna's problem, then surely it can solve our problems. We can't imagine ever being in such an extreme situation as Arjuna was, where he, as such a qualified person, actually basically had a mental breakdown. Today, I mean, that's quite ordinary, that people have mental breakdowns because they're stressed. But Arjuna was of the caliber that we just can't find people like that today. We don't even find anyone close to Arjuna's caliber in terms of good character, proper education and training, skills. He's such a qualified person. But the situation was so extreme that he practically had a mental breakdown. Of course, again, this is Krishna's arrangement. This is by Krishna's will that Arjuna has this reaction. And that's one of the reasons that Krishna smiles at Arjuna in the first chapter. He draws the chariot between the two armies and he says, just behold, Partha, all the Kurus assembled here. Right? He knows what's going to happen. In other words, he's hinting that, well, look at all your family members here on the battlefield, Arjuna. They're all your family members. Do you not want to fight now? Because they're your family members and you have to kill them? Krishna knows what's going to happen. And Krishna actually specifically puts Arjuna under the influence of Mahamaya, his illusory potency. So the Bhagavad Gita can be spoken. Prabhupada gives the example of how Krishna does this with Arjuna and how he does it in many other circumstances as well, with the tradition in the Vedic culture of how a newly married girl would learn the culture of the family that she had joined, because in Vedic culture, when a girl gets married, she leaves her family and joins the family of the husband. Right. And so then she would have to learn the particular ways of that family. Right. So Srila Prabhupada explains that as the mother-in-law teaches the daughter-in-law, similarly the Lord teaches the world. Right. In other words, the mother-in-law teaches the daughter-in-law, the new girl who's entered the family, by teaching her own daughter. Similarly, the Lord teaches the world by teaching his own devotee. In other words, if the girl comes into the family and the mother-in-law just starts, look, you don't do it like this, you do it like that. We don't do things like that in this house, we do it like this. Obviously that's not going to be very easy for the new family member to receive. So she does it subtly, she does it indirectly by instructing her own daughter. And then by observation, the daughter-in-law learns. So real human civilization is very subtle. Right. So similarly, Krishna doesn't just come down and tell everybody, hey, surrender unto me, alright, got it? He teaches the world by teaching his own devotee. As if the devotee needs an education, just like in the family. The daughter doesn't need an education from the mother. She's already been brought up in that family. She knows all the ways of the house. Right? So similarly, the devotee, in this case Arjuna, he doesn't need to hear the Bhagavad Gita. He already knows. But for the sake of teaching the world, Krishna makes an arrangement so that the devotee appears to need education. So that is the situation here on the battlefield of Kurukshetra. Arjuna actually does go into Maya. And Krishna's smiling. He's smiling because one reason, Prabhupada explains, is because a friend, Arjuna is Krishna's friend, he has a friendly relationship with Krishna, will choose to become a disciple. That's not usually what happens with friends. But Krishna smiles about that. Oh, my friend Arjuna now wants to become my disciple. Also, Krishna's smiling because he's amazed at the potency of his own illusory energy. He says, look, here's my pure devotee Arjuna. One moment he's in full Krishna consciousness, the next moment he's in total Maya. Amazing. Krishna's smiling about that. Look at this. Of course, that's only temporary. And it's only for the sake of educating us here in the material world. The lesson we get from the Bhagavad Gita is that even in the most extreme situation that Arjuna was in, having to fight and kill his own family members for the sake of Dharma, the Bhagavad Gita can solve his problems, and therefore certainly it can solve our problems. And at the end of the Gita, Arjuna gets the result of a proper spiritual education. He says, Nashna moha, now my illusion is gone. Smritir labda, my memory of my relationship with you, Krishna, has been revived. So that is the result of a proper spiritual education. One becomes free from illusion. One remembers their relationship with Krishna. Tvat prasadat maya achyuta. He says, by your mercy, O infallible one, Achyuta, these things have taken place. Gatosmi stitosmi gata sandeha. I am now firmly situated. I'm free from all my doubts. Karishe vachanam tava. And now I'm prepared to act according to your instructions. Again, the Bhagavad Gita is spoken on purpose by Krishna on this battlefield to show that real education is supposed to be applied. You're supposed to act on it. And that's the example we get here with Arjuna. He acts on Krishna's instructions. And by that activity, he will get even more education. He'll get even more experience of the theory that Krishna has presented in these 18 chapters. So we're going to the 4th chapter, Transcendental Knowledge, and this verse here is really the most important verse in the Bhagavad Gita. Tadvidhi pranipatena pariprashnena sevaya upadekshanti te jnanam jnaninas tattvadarshanaha. Just try to learn the truth by approaching a spiritual master, inquire from him submissively, and render service unto him. The self-realized souls can impart knowledge unto you because they have seen the truth. Why is it the most important verse in the Bhagavad Gita? Anybody tell? Isn't the verse at the end where Krishna says, always think of me, become my devotee? Right? Isn't that the most important verse? Isn't that the conclusion of the Bhagavad Gita? Manmana bhavamad bhakto majaji mam namaskuru. Always think of me, become my devotee, worship me, offer your homage unto me, and in this way you'll come to me without fail. I promise you this, because you're my very dear friend. Isn't that the most important verse? That's what Krishna wants us to do, right? That's the whole point of him speaking the Gita. Actually, in the verse before that, he even says, this is my most confidential instruction. Sarva guya tamam bhuya shinu me paramam vachaha ishtosi me dritamiti tato vakshami te hitam. Now, Arjuna, I'll speak to you the most confidential part of wisdom, my supreme instruction. Hear it from me, for it's for your benefit. Always have to remember that. Krishna is speaking the Bhagavad Gita for our benefit. Not for Krishna's benefit. Krishna's independent. Swarat. For our benefit, Krishna speaks the Gita and says, always think of me, become my devotee. It's for our benefit, not for his benefit. It's not like Krishna has some insecurities and, oh no, there's some people in the material world, they're not thinking of me. Oh no, maybe I should go to a counsellor and get some therapy. I've got low self-esteem because there's some people that are not thinking of me and becoming my devotees. It's not like that. Krishna says, Te hitam, it's for your benefit I'm speaking this. In other words, Krishna knows that without us reviving our original relationship with him, we're never going to be happy. It's impossible. It's like the hand trying to be happy separate from the body. It just doesn't work that way. or a newborn baby trying to be happy separate from the mother. It doesn't work that way. So for our benefit, Krishna speaks Bhagavad Gita and says, always think of me, become my devotee. Abandon all varieties of religion and just surrender unto me. So isn't that the most important text in the Gita? Who can say? Why is today's text more important?
Because that's how we understand all the rest of Bhagavad Gita.
Yeah, that's right. Which means that's how we understand, ultimately,
The conclusion?
the conclusion, for sure. We're understanding that conclusion through the approaching a spiritual master, in this case, Srila Prabhupada, right? He's explaining the Bhagavad Gita to us through the disciplic succession. And also, we have to learn how to actually do that. So not just the Siddhanta or the philosophical conclusion, of course we have to know that, but we also have to know how to actually achieve it, right? That's why in Lord Chaitanya's discussion with Ramananda Rai, we were reading that verse in the last class, one of the verses from that discussion, Lord Chaitanya asks Ramananda Roy about sadhya, which is the goal, the ultimate goal, and he also asks them about sadhana, the process to achieve the goal. And as he says to Ramananda Roy, now you've explained to me the sadhya, now please explain to me the sadhana, because without understanding the sadhana, or the means to attain the goal, we're never going to attain it. Right? So how do you understand both the sadhya and the sadhana? That's why Krishna speaks this verse. You have to learn from a devotee of Krishna. You want to understand Krishna? You have to approach a devotee of Krishna, because they're the only people in this world that actually understand Krishna. Krishna says to Arjuna, Bhaktosi me sakha cheti rahasyam hitarutamam. Because you're my sakha, you're my friend, and my bhakta, my devotee, therefore I'm speaking to you this most confidential knowledge of the science of yoga. Therefore you can understand it. In other words, Krishna is saying, I only reveal myself to people that love me. And the only people that love Krishna are devotees of Krishna. So if you really want to understand Krishna, which requires him revealing himself to you, then you have to approach a devotee of Krishna. That's Krishna's system for others to get to know him. He says, my devotees are so dear to me that in order to glorify them, I will make it so that I'm only going to reveal myself through them. I'm only going to reveal myself through those devotees. That's Krishna glorifying his own devotees. It's a pretty glorious position, right? You think about it. Like God himself says, because my devotees are so glorious, I'm only going to reveal myself through them. I'm not going to do it directly. I'm only going to come out through them. And coming out through them means that they will reveal the process by which we can convince Krishna to reveal himself to us. Right? So therefore in this verse Krishna says, Tadvidhi pranipatena. Just try to learn the truth by approaching a spiritual master. Now this truth is, the first word in this verse is tat. Tat means that, and that refers, as we were discussing in the last class, to what Krishna has just said. So he said something and then he said, now about that I've just said, just try to learn it by approaching a spiritual master. So what was it that he just said? Prabhupada translates here in the synonyms, that knowledge of different sacrifices, whether we discussed this in the last class. So sacrifice or yajna is the process by which to convince Krishna to reveal himself, right? And to learn that knowledge of different sacrifices, or in other words, to learn the specific way that you can convince Krishna to reveal himself to you, then you approach a spiritual master. You approach a qualified teacher. They will teach you how to do that. All right. So this then takes us on to what it means to be a qualified teacher. What does Krishna say in this verse? Jnaninas tattva darshanaha. So Prabhupada translates the word jnanina. Jnanina comes from the word jnanam, which he's explained, which was the previous word. Jnana means knowledge, or jnana means knowledge, and jnanina means one who has knowledge. In other words, those that have knowledge, they can give you knowledge. And he specifically translates jnanina in this verse as the self-realized. So it's realized knowledge, it's not simply theoretical. And tattva means of the truth, and darshana means seers. So the self-realized seer of the truth, that is Krishna's definition here of a qualified teacher. They have to be a self-realized seer of the truth. So the term tattvadarshi, this is an important term. Tattvadarshi, one who has seen the truth. What does this mean? This word tattva, it means the truth, but it's not the truth in the sense of, are you telling the truth? It's the truth in the sense of something that exists. In other words, something that exists is true, and something that doesn't exist is not true. Now, this specifically refers to things that are eternal and things that are temporary. If something in the context of Shastra, when the terms existence and non-existence are used, they're referring to things that either exist permanently, in which case they are referred to as having existence, or things that don't exist permanently, which are considered to be non-existent. In other words, they don't exist. They may exist now, but they're not going to exist for very long. Right. So tattva means the truth in the sense of something that actually exists permanently. That's the Shastric definition of existence. In other words, something's only really true if it always exists. If it comes and goes, it's not really true. It's not really a truth. Like material happiness, for example. That's why you'll read in certain places in the Shastra statements that it doesn't actually exist. Of course, it does exist, but it doesn't exist from the perspective of the spiritual platform, because it's just coming and going. It's not real. Real things exist permanently. So real happiness is something that always exists. It's not something that comes and goes. So this verse then explains the qualified teacher as tattvadarshi, one whose darshi means to see, or a seer. Tattva means the truth. So they've seen that which actually exists. They've had that darshi, just like the term darshan, right? We have darshan of the deities, darshan of the spiritual master. It's a direct vision, right? So darshi, tattvadarshi, one who's had a direct vision of that which exists. And there are basically three fundamental categories of existence, or three tattvas, three things that have permanent existence. So you have jiva tattva, that's the living entity, the soul. Vishnu tattva, that's the supreme soul. And shakti tattva, those are the energies of Krishna. So those are the three fundamental categories of existence, the three tattvas. So one who's actually seen those three tattvas is called tattvadarshi, and that is the qualification for being a spiritual teacher. So how does one see these truths? Prabhupada explains in his purport to this verse. He says that it's by the disciplic succession. Right? That's the technology of the yoga culture. It's like today, we think we have a lot of technology. Of course, it's destroying the planet and destroying all the living entities in the planet, but still we think we're very advanced because we have so much technology. But the real technology is called parampara, which means disciplic succession. That perfect knowledge originates from the perfect source, that's Krishna, the source of all energies, and then it descends in a chain of teacher to student, teacher to student, teacher to student, in an unbroken chain, and in that way you can actually receive perfect knowledge. And remember, Krishna said, Evam parampara praptam, this is in the same chapter as this verse today, but at the beginning of the chapter, Imam Rajasha Yovidu Sakali Neha Mahata Yoga Nashta. He says that when that disciplic succession is broken, the chain's broken, like it's got a broken link, then it's just like if you've got a chain and the link's broken, the chain doesn't work anymore. It can't chain anything up, right? So similarly, if the parampara, if a link in the chain breaks, then the whole parampara becomes dysfunctional, right? So that's actually that's the technology of how perfect knowledge comes down from the Supreme Source, from Krishna, to us. As long as all the links in the chain are intact, we get the perfect knowledge. If there's a break in the chain, then, as he says, yoga nashta, the great science of yoga appears to be lost. It's never actually lost, but it can be covered for some time until that link in the chain is fixed again. Right. So that's why Krishna is now speaking the Bhagavad Gita to Arjuna. That's another reason, because he detected that there was a break in the chain of disciplic succession, and he had to reform that chain by again speaking the Bhagavad Gita with the intended purport. So it's not that the Bhagavad Gita ever becomes lost, but what can become lost due to the influence of time, kala, is the actual purport of the Bhagavad Gita. Like Prabhupada gives the example of how when he wrote his commentary on the Bhagavad Gita, actually explains in the introduction, you may remember that, he says, one may question what is the need for another edition of the Bhagavad Gita, considering that in English there are over 700 editions already. Right? And he says, well, he met one lady in the Western world, so this was after he left India and came to New York, and she asked if he could recommend a copy of the Bhagavad Gita, and he couldn't, because he said basically all of the editions were not following this parampara, this disciplic succession. In other words, they weren't really presenting Bhagavad Gita as it is, as Krishna intended it to be spoken. They were all giving their own interpretation on the Bhagavad Gita, which makes it useless. That's the break in the chain. All right. So then he decided that he could see there was a need for a Bhagavad Gita as it is, as Krishna wanted it to be understood. Therefore, he presented his Bhagavad Gita as it is. And he said, what is the proof that this Bhagavad Gita is actually as it is, and the other Bhagavad Gitas are bogus? He said, because even though there were so many editions of the Bhagavad Gita in English, before this edition, there were no devotees of Krishna. And that's the whole point of the Gita, is that you read it, And Krishna says at the end, always think of me, become my devotee. That's actually the result of hearing Bhagavad Gita as it is. But there were no devotees. Because the so-called presenters of the Bhagavad Gita were not presenting Bhagavad Gita as it is. They weren't presenting Krishna's message. They were presenting their own message through Krishna's words. Just like Prabhupada explained, there was one famous scholar in India at the time who actually, I think, also became the Prime Minister of India for some time. And he gave his version of the Bhagavad Gita. And Prabhupada said his translations were actually 90% accurate, but his purports were way off. For example, in the verse where Krishna says, Man mana bhava mad bhakta, which is very, very simple Sanskrit. Man mana, think of me. Like, it's just very simple. Bhava mad bhakta, become my devotee. It's almost literal, right? So what did the scholar write? When Krishna says always think of him, he doesn't really mean think of him. What he really means is just think of the him that's everywhere and it's all pervading. Just like, let's say Freddie asked me, Marvan, could you pass me some water? And I say, yeah, okay, Freddie, here's some water here in this thermos. And then I just go and start, splashing it all around the room. And Freddie's like, what are you doing, man? It's like, well, you asked me to give you some water, but, I know that actually that's not you speaking as a person. I actually know that you're everywhere. And so therefore I should just spray the water everywhere because you're just everywhere. That's really what you mean, isn't it, Freddie? No, that's not what I mean. That's what Freddie would say. I meant give me the water, meaning me the person, Freddie, right? Isn't that what you'd think? Yeah, common sense, right? So when Krishna says, always think of me, he means me the person, sitting on the chariot with Arjuna. Not like the Krishna that's everywhere. He doesn't say that. Man mana, always think of me. Mam ekam, surrender to me. Actually, one of the acharyas, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, he says that when Krishna speaks that verse, Savadaman Prityaja Mame Kam Sharanam Raja, abandon all varieties of religion and just surrender unto me. He says that Krishna's standing on the chariot, looking at Arjuna, pointing at his chest, saying, surrender to me. So that's the vision of Tattvadarshi, an actual seer of the truth, not some mental speculator. So when you have this disciplic succession broken through this process of mental speculation, then yoga nashta, Krishna says, the great science of yoga becomes lost. So the actual technology then in the Vedic culture is this disciplic succession. By that technology you can get perfect knowledge, and you can very easily perfect your life with that knowledge and go back to Godhead. We have so-called technology today. It's like we live in the so-called information age. But the shocking truth is that people today know everything except what they really need to know, which is what Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita. So if we follow this disciplic succession, this Vedic technology, we can get that knowledge, particularly from a Tattvadarshi, one who's seen the truth through this parampara, disciplic succession, and in this way we can actually become successful students, can actually become educated in how to meet our real needs of loving the Supreme Lord. So let's have a look at Prabhupada's purport. He talks here about the qualification of the spiritual teacher. He says at the beginning of the purport, the path of spiritual realization is undoubtedly difficult. Anyone disagree with that? Yeah, it's a little difficult, right? Why is it difficult? Yeah, we don't want to surrender to Krishna. Krishna says, surrender to me, and we're just scratching our heads going, oh, no. Meanwhile, we're surrendering to so many illusory things. That's okay, right? That's all just natural. It's part of life. Surrendering to your sense gratification, right? Surrendering to other people's sense gratification. But that's understandable. I mean, you just got to do what you got to do, right? It's got to be practical. Yeah, path of spiritualization is undoubtedly difficult because we have a material body. It's full of material desires. We're in the material world. We're just agitating those material desires. And then it's also Kali Yuga, where people are very slow about their spiritual realization. So therefore, yes, the path of spiritual realization is undoubtedly difficult. The Lord therefore advises us to approach a bona fide spiritual master in the line of disciplic succession from the Lord himself. So remember our question was, how does this qualified teacher actually see the truth? Right? No one can be a bona fide spiritual master without following this principle of disciplic succession. The Lord is the original spiritual master, and a person in the disciplic succession can convey the message of the Lord as it is to his disciple. Right? And that's what Prabhupada said about his Bhagavad Gita. Right? That before Bhagavad Gita as it is came out, although there were so many editions of the Gita in English, no devotees of Krishna. As soon as Bhagavad Gita as it is comes out, thousands of devotees all over the world. So that's the proof that my edition is the real edition. No one can be a bona fide spiritual master without following this principle of disciplic succession. The Lord is the original spiritual master, and a person in the disciplic succession can convey the message of the Lord as it is to his disciple, right? So that's what Prabhupada's doing. No one can be spiritually realized by manufacturing his own process, as is the fashion of the foolish pretenders. Oh, come on, can't we manufacture our own process? What do you think, Freddie? Sounds a bit, I don't know, it's just like unnecessarily like pedantic or something. Like, no one can be spiritually realized by manufacturing his own process, as is the fashion of the foolish pretenders. You're calling me a foolish pretender for manufacturing my own process? But think about it. How can you manufacture your own process to know somebody else? That's foolish. If you actually want to know somebody else, what's the best way?
Ask them.
Exactly. Ask them. Like if I want to know Freddie, what's the best way to get to know you, Freddie?
Ask me.
No, I want to manufacture my own process. I think Freddie is, like this and like that. And that'd be foolish, wouldn't it? Yeah, just the straightforward way is just to ask him. Like I asked him when I first met him, where are you from? How long have you been here? Something about his history. And of course, if I can't ask him directly, what's the next best thing?
Ask someone who knows him.
Ask someone who knows him, of course. I can ask his mother. She knows him the best, probably. Right? Ask his people in his family. So that's all that Krishna's saying. Is if you want to get to know me, then I'm speaking in the Bhagavad Gita, right, about myself. And in order to get that clear, you just approach my devotee, because they know me. The Bhagavatam 6.3.19 says, Dharmang tu sakshad bhagavat pranitam. The path of religion is directly enunciated by the Lord. Therefore, mental speculation or dry arguments cannot help lead one to the right path. Nor by independent study of books of knowledge can one progress in spiritual life. One has to approach a bona fide spiritual master to receive the knowledge. So this is Krishna's essential definition of a qualified spiritual teacher. They see the truth, meaning the three fundamental categories of existence, through the disciplic succession. This knowledge is also called Sambandha Gyan, and remember we discussed that in the previous focus on the 4 seed verses of the Srimad Bhagavatam. Right? Sambandha means the relationship, so Sambandha Gyan means the knowledge of the relationship between Krishna and his energies. So Vishnu Tattva, that's Krishna; Jiva Tattva, the energy of the living entity; Shakti Tattva, the energy of the spiritual realm and the material realm. Now if we zoom out and look at the context in which Krishna speaks this verse, we see that he's just explained many different types of sacrifices or means of elevation for different candidates. Then he speaks this verse to Arjuna: just try to learn the truth by approaching a spiritual master. So implying that he should learn from the spiritual master how he can sacrifice and therefore elevate himself. Right, that's how Prabhupada's translated the first word, tat, that knowledge of different sacrifices. Vidhi, try to understand. So this is of course in context. Now, what was the sacrifice that Krishna asked Arjuna to perform? Did he say to Arjuna, okay, can you follow the 4 regular principles? Can you chant 16 rounds a day minimum? Did he say that? No. What did he ask Krishna? What did he ask Arjuna to do? What was the sacrifice he wanted him to do?
Fight and think of me. Fight and think of Krishna.
Yeah. He asked him to fight the battle. That was his sacrifice. Right? Mamanusmara yudhya cha. He said, always think of me and fight. In this case, literally, fight. He's a soldier. His duty is to fight. Right? In this case, he's fighting for the cause of Dharma. So this is also part then of the important part of the bona fide teacher's qualification. Then he understands how to apply the process of sacrifice to each student according to the time, according to the place, according to the candidate. Right. And of course he has to know the ultimate goal of all that sacrifice, which is love of Krishna. So therefore, knowing the process and the goal, they're called Abhidaya and Prayojana. We also covered those in the series on the 4 seed verses of the Bhagavatam in the 2nd canto. And that concludes the qualifications for the bona fide spiritual teacher. He must know the truth of our relationship with Krishna, how to direct his students to act in that relationship, and the ultimate goal of that relationship. And that knowledge has to be realised knowledge. It's simply a theory. He actually has to be tattvadoshi, he has to see that truth, or those truths. Right? Jnaninas, he has to be self-realised. So the authorised teacher then is tattvadoshi, a seer of the truth by disciplic succession. Any questions then on this part? Qualifications of the teacher?
What is Sadhya and Sanaya?
Oh, sadhya and sadhana?
Sadhya and Sanaya.
Yes, sadhana means the goal, and sadhana means the practice to achieve the goal.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah. So we go on to the qualification of the student. So we go back to our verse. Krishna says, just try to learn the truth by approaching a spiritual master, inquire from him submissively, and render service unto him. All right? The self-realised souls can impart knowledge into you because they have seen the truth. So here Krishna gives then the essential qualifications for a student, of which there are 3. So the first one then is humility. The student has to understand that no material knowledge or solution can actually solve his real problems. Right? So that's contained there in that word pranipatena, approaching a spiritual master with humility. So we see this in Arjuna in the beginning of the second chapter, where he says, Kapanya dosho pahatasvabhava prichami tam dharma samuda chetaha yat shreyasyan nishchitam bruhitan me shishasteham sharimam tvam prapanam. Now I've lost all composure due to miserly weakness. In this condition, I'm asking you to tell me for certain what is best for me. Now I'm your disciple and a soul surrendered unto you. Please instruct me. Right. So this is the humility necessary for the bona fide student. And then in the next verse, he says that even if I win an unrivaled, prosperous kingdom on earth with sovereignty like the demigods in heaven, it still wouldn't solve my problem. In other words, he's saying that there's no material solution to my problem, because you'd think, well, whatever problems I've got, if I could just get an unrivaled kingdom on earth with sovereignty like the demigods in heaven, that'd probably solve it, right? But no. Arjuna's admitting, no, there is no material solution for my problem. Therefore, I need to, in that humble state of mind, approach a real teacher. The second qualification then is interest. So Arjuna has interest in hearing from the teacher. He's not there just because he has to be, or he's kind of bored. He'd rather be doing something else. He's actually very interested in hearing from the teacher, and that's shown throughout the Gita by his inquisitiveness. He's always asking questions. You notice that? He's always asking questions throughout the Gita. Well, Krishna, you said this, and then you said that, but it seems like a contradiction. Can you please clarify that? Right? It's not like his brain is just turned off. Right? His brain is turned on. He's interested. He wants to know. Right? And so therefore he's asking questions, and he's asking for clarification on certain points. Right? So this is explained here by Krishna in this verse as pariprashnena, right? Posing relevant inquiries. And then the third qualification is sincerity. So his sincerity, Arjuna's sincerity, is shown by his desire to act on what he's heard. That's explained here in this verse by Krishna as sevaya, or rendering service. Right? So because he actually has that humility and interest in the subject matter, he's also wanting to apply what he's heard. He understands that Krishna's actually asking me to do something here. I'm not watching a movie, I'm not on Netflix or watching YouTube or something. He wants me to do something. Right? That's part of my education. So we may discuss that in the following class about when we look at the traditional system of student life from the 7th canto of the Bhagavatam in relation to the activities of the brahmachari. So part of the activities of the brahmachari are that they beg. They go and beg on behalf of the guru. And of course this certainly requires humility, and it also cultures humility. That's one of the very important results of that kind of service, because again, humility is necessary for learning. If the student thinks, well, I already know, what the teacher's going to say, and actually, what does he know anyway? Actually, I know. Then obviously he's not going to learn much, right? So humility is necessary, and by begging, the student actually cultivates humility. Begging is a very humble profession. Something like Krishna told the cowherd boys there when they went to beg from the Vedic Brahmanas, right, in Vrindavan, who were performing the sacrifice. Sometimes you get when you beg, and sometimes you don't get. It's just the way it is. So it's a very humbling occupation, and that humility is helpful for the student, right? Helps them to learn. So that's part of how activity, the proper activity, helps in a student's education. So if a student's sincere, then they will understand the value of the activity that the teacher is asking me to do, and they will do their best to act in that way. So we see here in the Bhagavad Gita, Arjuna's sincerity is shown by his desire to act on what he's heard, right? That's called sevaya, or rendering of service. Right. So Arjuna's doubts then, at the end of the Gita, they're cleared. He's cleared all his doubts. He has that humility. He has that interest. He's asked so many questions. His doubts have been cleared. And then he agrees to act on Krishna's instructions. Right? Karashe vachanam tava. Now I'm going to act according to what you say. So through applying that theoretical knowledge that he's heard in the Gita, that's called jnana, then he'll get that realized knowledge or experience, vijnana. Krishna, in many places in Bhagavad Gita and also in the other Shastras, Bhagavatam, then we have that combination of two words that explain knowledge, jnana and vijnana. Like in the Bhagavatam verse that we spoke on recently, which was the prelude to the 4 seed verses of the Bhagavatam, jnanam paramaguya me yad vijnana samanvitam. Krishna said to Lord Brahma at the beginning of the creation, I'm going to give you jnana, theoretical knowledge, and vijnana, realized knowledge. Right. Similarly, in the 9th chapter of the Gita, Krishna says, idam tute guyatamam pravakshyami anasuyave jnanam vijnana sahitam yajgat va mokshashe shubat. My dear Arjuna, because you are never envious of me, I'll impart unto you this most confidential knowledge and realization, knowing which you shall be relieved of the miseries of material existence. So that realization, that vijnana, that comes from then applying the jnana, the theoretical knowledge. So if we go back to our purport, 434, Prabhupada also explains then the symptoms of a qualified student. He says that such a spiritual master should be accepted in full surrender, and one should serve the spiritual master like a menial servant without false prestige. Satisfaction of the self-realized spiritual master is the secret of advancement in spiritual life. Inquiries and submission constitute the proper combination for spiritual understanding. Unless there is submission and service, inquiries from the learned spiritual master will not be effective. One must be able to pass the test of the spiritual master, and when he sees the genuine desire of the disciple, he automatically blesses the disciple with genuine spiritual understanding. In this verse, both blind following and absurd inquiries are condemned. Not only should one hear submissively from the spiritual master, but one must also get a clear understanding from him in submission and service and inquiries. A bona fide spiritual master is by nature very kind towards the disciple. Therefore, when the student is submissive and is always ready to render service, the reciprocation of knowledge and inquiries becomes perfect. So if there's inquiry, but then there's no submission and there's no service, then those inquiries, they're not going to amount to anything. All right. That's why you'll see sometimes people are fortunate enough to have the association of a bona fide spiritual master, and they'll ask questions and they'll get the answers, but nothing happens for them. There's no illumination there of the intelligence, because the first qualification of humility is not there, right? And also the sincerity is not there either. They don't want to act on what they've heard, right? So therefore, as Prabhupada says, unless there is submission and service, inquiries from the learned spiritual master will not be effective. One must be able to pass the test of the spiritual master, and when he sees the genuine desire of the disciple, he automatically blesses the disciple with genuine spiritual understanding. So the spiritual master, then he wants to see that sincerity. And Prabhupada also says in this verse, both blind following and absurd inquiries are condemned, right? So if you just blindly follow someone, then it's quite likely you'll be following the wrong person, particularly in the age of Kali. One of the symptoms of people in the age of Kali is that they're sumanda mataya, which means that even if you find the rare person that's interested in spiritual life, they're misguided by so many cheaters, right? Because they're just blindly following someone out of sentiment, right? So therefore he says that's condemned. And then absurd inquiries, right? So you don't go to a guru and ask them about things that are just not relevant to spiritual life. It's not the guru's business to help the disciple just increase their material life. Like Prabhupada would say so many times, they come to a sadhu and ask for, oh Swamiji, please, heal my, gastrointestinitis or something. So he says, why don't you go to a doctor? Why do you come to a guru for that? You need to go to a doctor. Right? It's an absurd inquiry to pose towards a spiritual teacher. You go to a spiritual teacher to ask about how to improve your spiritual life. Right? And then he says, not only should one hear submissively from the spiritual master, but one must also get a clear understanding from him. Right? So you've got to use your intelligence. That's the point. The student is not just like a robot that goes, yes, okay, sure. The student has to try to understand clearly what the teacher is trying to communicate. That's through submission and service and inquiries. So those are the three qualifications then of the student. A bona fide spiritual master is by nature very kind toward the disciple. You always have to remember that, particularly when you're getting chastised. That's part of the kindness, right? Therefore, when the student is submissive and is always ready to render service, the reciprocation of knowledge and inquiries becomes perfect. So the example is given that if a man is potent and a woman is fertile, then through their combination there'll be a child. So similarly, if both the teacher and the student are actually qualified, then there is education. There is the impartation of education. That means that the student's full potential is awakened, meaning their spiritual potential, and naturally that means all their needs, particularly their greatest need, is met through that educational process. You remember Kaviraj Goswami says, Sarva karma krita hoy, right? That if you serve Krishna, then all your duties are taken care of, all your needs are met. Right? And then the result beyond this, you could say, or the expansion of this result, is that the student becomes successful in the sense that in time that student also becomes a seer of the truth or a qualified spiritual teacher. Right? So that's the ultimate success of the student, is that the student then becomes the next teacher. So after giving the symptoms of both the qualified teacher and student in today's verse, then in the next verse 435, Krishna says, having obtained real knowledge from a self-realized soul, you will never fall again into such illusion. For by this knowledge you will see that all living beings are but part of the Supreme, or in other words, that they are mine. So he's saying that to Arjuna that after this process of education, you will also see the truth. And in that way you also become qualified to teach. you also become tattvadarshi. Ganinas tattvadarshana, you become a self-realised seer of the truth. That's the conclusion of the educational process. Right. So, yeah, he can become, such a student then becomes the next link in the chain, in the disciplic succession, and in this way the mission of Krishna expands. That's the idea. So today's qualified student becomes tomorrow's qualified teacher. So we'll summarise here. A successful student is one who has received an education. We're summarising both classes, this class and the previous one. A successful student is one who has received an education. Education means learning our needs and how to meet them. Needs are both material and spiritual. Spiritual needs are primary because we are spiritual. Material needs are secondary as facilitators to the primary. A successful student is one who has received an education in Krishna Bhakti and therefore knows their greatest need, love of Krishna, and how to meet it through devotional service. In time, such a successful student becomes a qualified spiritual teacher. Hare Krishna. Anyone have any questions about the qualified student? Mm-hmm.
Thank you for class. And the purport says that the spiritual master will test the disciple to see if they're sincere. So I'm wondering what does that test look like? Or how can it look like?
Preliminarily, it means that the student follows the 4 regular principles and chants a minimum of 16 rounds a day. That's a test. And that's a test that every student has to pass if they want to formally enroll in what, as our spiritual master says, the Bhakti Academy. If someone's sincere, then they'll do it. So far as other tests go, that's more on an individual level. It's hard to say. But it's a good start to follow the 4 regular principles and chant a minimum of 16 rounds a day. Right? If we can't pass that test, then we're not going to have any success in any other tests. That's the basis of effectively tackling whatever tests the spiritual master and Krishna may mercifully bring our way in the future. Anything else? Yeah.
Sometimes, like recently, there's a lot of new bhaktas coming along, and I'm not very well versed in the Gita, but sometimes it can be a challenge explaining what's happening on the battlefield, because it can seem like maybe like if someone new doesn't, I guess you could say, believe in reincarnation and that the soul is eternal, then the Gita can very quickly just turn into a book like the instructions of Krishna to kill his family. Could be pretty extreme.
That's why Krishna speaks 18 chapters of philosophy. Otherwise the book would just be... in other words, the Bhagavad Gita is 1 chapter of the Mahabharata, right? The whole purpose of the Mahabharata, which is 150,000 verses, at least the version that we have, is to facilitate people hearing the Bhagavad Gita. Because people in the age of Kali, in case you hadn't noticed, they're not very bright. They're not really attracted to philosophy and actual knowledge. They're manda, they're slow. So if you read in the first canto of the Bhagavatam about Vyasadev's compiling the Vedic literature, or, meaning he wrote it down, not kind of compiled it and wrote it down for people in the age of Kali. So he could see people are just they're not very bright in the age of Kali, and they're certainly not going to remember, just hearing the Gita once and remember it all like people could in previous ages. So I have to write it down. Nowadays, of course, foolish Kali Yuga intellectuals think that writing is human advancement. It's the opposite. Actually, writing is only necessary when people have very bad memories and can't remember anything. So previously, there was nothing written down. It was an oral tradition, because people could remember. But Vyasadeva could see people are their memories are terrible in the age of Kali. They're just very spiritually challenged. I have to write things down. So he wrote down all the Vedas, and he also wrote Upanishads, Vedanta Sutra, Puranas, and then he wrote the Mahabharata for, as is stated, the less intelligent. That means Shudras, Vaishyas, and women. What does it mean to be less intelligent? Does it mean that you can't do maths, you can't drive a car, you can't manage a cash register? No. It means that in the context of spiritual advancement, intelligence is that which controls the senses and understands actual knowledge. Right? So people today, they're less intelligent. Everybody's less intelligent. Has anybody that really can control their senses and that has a very deep understanding of spiritual knowledge? They're pretty hard to come by, right? So the Mahabharata is basically 150,000 verses of social dealings, drama, the things that less intelligent people like, social media. It's basically like Vedic social media. And the whole purpose of that is to attract less intelligent people to the one chapter called the Bhagavad Gita, in which Krishna actually speaks philosophy. So even the Bhagavad Gita begins on the battlefield with some drama, right? Because Krishna knows. He knows how to pull you in to the essential message that he wants to give. And he knows people in the age of Kali, they're not very switched on. So we've got to, here's some drama, this'll pull them in, So you read in the first chapter about the battle, and it's as I said, on purpose, Krishna speaks in that situation because it's something that's going to pique your interest. Right? People in the age of Kali, they're not, hey, let's sit down and read the Vedanta Sutra together today. Yeah, man, let's just dive into it, No, it's got to be something social, emotional, dramatic, right? Otherwise they're just like, oh man, just wake me up when it's over, okay? Right? So you get the dramatic scene on the battlefield, and there's the Kauravas and the Pandavas, right? And the battle's been, there's this huge dramatic build-up to the battle, and the Pandavas getting cheated out of their kingdom, and their wife was lost in the gambling match, and they've been in exile for, 13 years or something, and then every attempt was made to prevent the battle. Even Krishna himself went to plead for peace with the Kauravas. They wouldn't have it, right? So there has to be a fight. So people in the age of Kali like this. Oh, this is good, right? It's like, how this is almost as good as like Terminator 2 or something. And then in that situation, when your interest is piqued, then Arjuna has this breakdown. And you think, oh, yeah, well, that sounds reasonable. He's got to kill his own family. How can Krishna ask him to do that? Right? So Krishna knows that you're going to have that kind of reaction. Because people in the age of Kali, they're dull. You've got to shake them up. Wake up! Right? So this is Krishna's way of doing it. Wake up, you idiots! Listen to this! You're not the body! Right? It's the first point he makes. So the point is he gets your attention, and then when he's got your attention, he can actually speak some knowledge. So you have to become expert at explaining to people the Bhagavad Gita. The context of the battle, I explained a little bit, but in principle, it was self-defense. The Kauravas had unlawfully stolen the kingdom of the Pandavas and tried to kill them and their family in many different ways. Do you think they should, particularly considering they're soldiers, do you think they should just, go, hey, peace, man? Non-violence. You think they should do that? Would you do that? Some people are attacking you and your family and you're just like, oh man, I'm a pacifist. Spiritual man. No, it's self-defense. That's the legitimate use of strength. That's why Krishna says, I am the strength of the strong, devoid of passion and desire. The purpose of the strength of the strong is to defend those who are weak, those who are innocent, those who are being exploited. So you have to explain it to people. And actually, as we said, every attempt was made to avoid that battle, but the other side were determined. Krishna himself went and pleaded for peace with Duryodhana. He wouldn't have it. He's an empowered demon. He just wouldn't have it. So there's nothing wrong with defending yourself if you're being attacked. And also, Arjuna, as a military person, it's his duty to protect not just his family, but the whole of society from demoniac forces, people who are just out and out materialistic. That's his duty. That's the actual duty of a political leader, a military person. Nowadays, the political leaders, they don't have a clue what they're doing. They think they have the interest of the people at heart sometimes, but they have no knowledge. They just sponsor sinful activities. Just like we were saying yesterday, we're looking at all that flooding, right? We're Trent and I were looking at these videos of this flooding up north. There's one guy, his whole, his house is like a metre, water's like a metre high in his house. He's in a kayak, on his front lawn, kayaking around his front lawn, talking to the news reporters. They're saying, a couple of days ago I was filleting a tuna out here. Beautiful sunshine, blue skies. Now look at this. Where did this come from? And the leaders of society, they just got no clue. They can't see the connection between sinful activities and sinful reactions. They promote the sinful activities. Right? Basically, that's what an election is. And that's what the build-up to an election is in the contemporary society. It's basically groups of ignorant people trying to convince the masses that I will provide for you better and cheaper sinful activities. That's the Kali Yuga definition of prosperity. More and better and cheaper sinful activities. So vote for us. All right? Crazy. But it's just no knowledge. So Krishna's interested in how society is being managed. He wants the society to be managed in a way by which people actually make spiritual advancement, by which they become free from their ignorance and their suffering, make spiritual advancement, and ultimately go back to Godhead. Therefore he wanted the Kauravas out, and he wanted the Pandavas in. The Kauravas actually were good managers, but there was one problem. They were anti-Krishna. So Krishna wanted them out, and he wanted his devotees in. Right? So you have to be able to explain these things to people. It's reasonable, isn't it? Insofar as reincarnation goes, that's the first point that Krishna makes. Arjuna, you're speaking like a learned person that has knowledge, but you're a fool, because you're just evaluating this whole situation based on the body. But we're not the body. And he gives that classic example. As you pass from boyhood to youth to old age, right? The body's changing. We call it growth, but it's not growth. The body's changing. We've changed bodies so many times, from childhood to youth to old age. But we're the same person. We can remember all our different bodies, right? So Krishna explains, reincarnation goes on even in this life. Everybody's had the experience. We just don't recognize it because we don't have any knowledge. Right? So Krishna's giving us that knowledge. Hey, look at this. Have you ever thought about this? So if you're smart, you'll go, yeah. Hey, I'm not the body. Cool. Right? And so you have to learn the Bhagavad Gita yourself so you can explain it to other people. It's not a question of faith. Krishna's not talking about faith. He's talking about things that are actually happening. Your body's changing, isn't it? Is that a belief? Is it if you don't believe your body's changing, it's not? It's something that's actually happening for everybody, regardless of whether you believe it or not. Whether you say you're this religion or that religion or no religion, you're changing bodies. What are you going to do about that? So Krishna's not talking about something you have to believe. He doesn't say, Arjuna, just believe in me on the battlefield and everything will be fine. You'll be saved. He doesn't say that. He says, look, you're changing bodies. What to do? What will your next body be? How did you get this body? How did you get this body? And what will your next body be? These are all very practical points. So from all angles, actually, Krishna's instruction to Arjuna to fight the battle is very reasonable. The higher angle, of course, is that Krishna wanted the battle. He wanted all those demons to be killed. That's part of his mission. Paritranaya saranam vanashaya cha dushkritam. To deliver the sadhus and to annihilate the miscreants. Krishna doesn't like miscreants. Right? They're anti-Krishna. They're anti-Krishna's mission, so why should he tolerate them? So in this case, he didn't do it himself. He had his devotee do it. Arjuna and his brothers. In this way, Arjuna is glorified. It's also another way of Krishna glorifying his devotee. Nimitta matram bhava savya sachani told Arjuna. I've already killed everybody on this battlefield. I'm the actual cause. But if you take my instructions seriously, you'll get the glory. I'll empower you to do it. Because actually, like you read at the beginning of the 10th canto, Parikshit Maharaj says to Shukadeva Goswami, before Shukadeva Goswami begins speaking, he says actually it was impossible for Arjuna to win that battle, materially impossible. He was fighting people like Bhishma Dev, Dronacharya, Like Duryodhana said to Bhishma Dev halfway through the battle, "Hey Jack, you want to open that window? It's a bit warm in here, eh?" Maybe it's just my pit is going up. A bit warm. He said to Bhishma Dev halfway through the battle, "You're so powerful, you could wipe them all out by yourself. All these wimpy Pandavas." Of course, they're not wimpy, but compared to Bhishma Dev, like Bhishma Dev he's in a league of his own. He says, Bhishma Dev, he says, you're holding back. You're only killing 10,000 a day. You're holding back. And you're holding back because they're your favourites. They're your grandchildren. Now that is really the wrong... If you want to fire up a Kshatriya, say that kind of thing, how the Kshatriya is being sentimental. He's not doing his duty. And so Bhishma Dev got really fired up. This rascal Duryodhana's criticising me, saying that I'm showing favouritism to my grandchildren. That's it. They're all going to die tomorrow. And he made these 5 arrows, one for each of the Pandavas. And he put mantras on each arrow, special mantras to kill the 5 brothers. Right? And Duryodhana said, "Ha, great. Got Bhishma Dev into action now." He said, "Can I just take those arrows, Bhishma Dev?" Yeah, take the arrows. Duryodhana wanted to keep them, for the next day, so that nothing happened to the arrows. He thought, this is it. Bhishma Dev's going to wipe them out. These arrows, kingdom's ours. But of course, Krishna, being omniscient, he knew Duryodhana's plan. And he knew that Duryodhana actually had offered a benediction to Arjuna, because Arjuna and his brothers, they saved Duryodhana's life when they were in the forest. And Duryodhana was... Anyway, that's another whole story. But they saved Duryodhana's life. So Duryodhana promised a benediction to them. And Arjuna said, we don't need a benediction now. We're happy here in the forest, in exile. We'll just take it later. So Krishna reminded Arjuna, you know how Duryodhana has made a plan for Bhishma Dev to kill you tomorrow, you and your brothers, with these 5 arrows, and he's going to do it as well. But you remember, Duryodhana owes you a benediction. So you go now to Duryodhana and you ask him for those 5 arrows. Okay. So Arjuna went to Duryodhana's tent, offered obeisances. Duryodhana says, "Yes, my dear Arjuna, what would you like?" Arjuna says, "You remember that benediction that you gave us in the forest? We'd like to take it now." And Arjuna says, and Duryodhana says, so you want the kingdom without fighting? Because that would be what Duryodhana would want. You want the kingdom without fighting? We'll give it. And Arjuna says, no, we're Kshatriyas, we like fighting. But just those 5 arrows. You give me those 5 arrows that you got from Bhishma Dev. And Duryodhana gave them. So that's Kshatriya honour. Even you make a promise, but it goes against your favour, you still keep it. Not like today. So then the next day in the battle, Bhishma Dev says, well, I haven't got those arrows, but still they're all going to die. At least Arjuna's going to die. Right. So he attacked Arjuna with so much strength that he smashed Arjuna's chariot to pieces. And he was just about to kill Arjuna. And then Krishna, who had promised in the battle, before the battle, that he wouldn't fight. He wouldn't fight whoever he was on the side of, because he gave the choice. So either side, you can have me on your side, or you can have my armies. So Duryodhana, because Krishna said, whoever I see first thing in the morning will get the choice. Right? So he said that to Duryodhana and Arjuna. So they both turned up first thing in the morning at Krishna's palace, and Arjuna went and stood at the end of Krishna's bed, and Duryodhana went and stood at the head of Krishna's bed, like right beside Krishna, because he thought, when Krishna opens his eyes, he'll see me, and then I'll get the first choice. I'll choose Krishna's armies, and we're definitely going to win the battle. right? But actually, when Krishna woke up, he just looked straight down the end of his bed and saw Arjuna. So he said, "Oh, Arjuna, you are the first one that I see this morning, so you get the first choice." Right? So then Duryodhana's, "Oh no, he's going to take Krishna's armies. That means we're going to lose the battle for sure." But Arjuna said, "No, we don't want your armies, Krishna, we want you." We want you on our side. Because Krishna said, "I'm not going to fight personally. I'll just be an advisor for whoever side I'm on." So then Duryodhana thought, great! Arjuna the fool, he just took Krishna. He didn't take the armies, we get the armies. So actually all of Krishna's armies were on Duryodhana's side. So Krishna had this promise that he wouldn't fight in the battle. But on that day of the battle, when Bhishma Dev had smashed Arjuna's chariot to pieces and was about to kill Arjuna, Krishna jumped down off the chariot, he grabbed the broken chariot wheel and ran towards Bhishma Dev to kill him. There's this beautiful painting of that. And Bhishma Dev is standing there with a sword in his hand, just it's this perfection for Bhishma Dev, fighting with Krishna. Because he was shooting arrows at Krishna, and Krishna was feeling them to be more pleasing than the kisses from his wives. These arrows piercing his chest. But Krishna's running towards Bhishma Dev with his chariot wheel in his hand, going to kill him. And Bhishma Dev says, just see how glorious Krishna is. He'll even break his own promise to protect his devotee. That's why in the Gita, Krishna says to Arjuna, Kaunteya pratijanihi, nami bhakta pranashyati. Declare it boldly, O Arjuna, that my devotee never perishes. Right? My devotee is never vanquished, because he asks Arjuna to declare it, because everybody knows that a devotee will always keep their promise. But Krishna, sometimes he breaks his promise. That's why he didn't say it himself. But of course he only breaks his promise to protect his devotee. So in this case, Bhishma Dev had promised, he's a devotee, and he'd promised, I'm going to kill Arjuna. Right. But Krishna had also promised not to fight. Actually, Bhishma Dev's promise was that either I'm going to kill Arjuna or I'm going to make Krishna break his promise. Because Krishna's promise was that he wouldn't fight. So he threatened Arjuna's life so severely that he was just about to kill Arjuna, and then Krishna got down off his chariot, breaking his promise, and was about to kill Bhishma Dev. So Bhishma Dev thought, just see how glorious Krishna is. He'll even break his own promise to protect his devotee. And of course, what happened at that point? Krishna's just about to kill Bhishma Dev, and the conch shell sounds for the end of the fighting for that day. So that's they have very strict fighting codes, the Kshatriyas. So when the conch shell stops, that's it. You got to stop. So Bhishma Dev fought on. He fought the next day, and was ultimately killed because Krishna, as he said to Arjuna in the Gita, Nimitta matram bhava sabhyasachan. I've already killed everyone on this battlefield, and you can just be an instrument in the fight. Right. So this is Krishna's way of glorifying his devotees. So he preserved Bhishma Dev's promise, because Bhishma Dev promised that either I kill Arjuna or Krishna gets down off his chariot and kills me. Right? That's my promise. So Krishna preserved that promise of Bhishma Dev by breaking his own promise and protecting his devotee Arjuna. Very incredible pastimes. Krishna's pastimes. Nothing like it in the material world. Anyone else have anything? Yeah.
You briefly covered the three tattvas,
Yeah.
as in the permanent always existing truths.
Mm.
They were the Jiva Tattva, Vishnu Tattva. What was the third one?
Shakti Tattva.
Shakti Tattva. I was wondering, what is or who is it rather, is the Pancha Tattva? And how do they fit into it?
I was just listening during breakfast to Prabhupada explaining the Panchatattva. Panchatattvatmakam Krishnam Bhakta Rupa Surupakam Bhaktavataram Bhaktakyam Namami Bhakti Shaktikam. So Kaviraj Goswami explains then the Panchatattva in this verse. Bhakta Rupa, so this is Lord Chaitanya, he's the form of a devotee. Bhakta Swarupa, this is his first manifestation as Lord Nityananda. Bhakta Avatar, this is the incarnation of a devotee, Advaita Acharya. Bhaktakyam, the pure devotee, Srivas Thakur. And Bhakti Shaktikam, the energy of a devotee, or the internal potency. So yeah, you have all three there in Panchatattva. The first three, Lord Chaitanya, Lord Nityananda, and Advaita Acharya, they're the Vishnu Tattva. And the Srivas Thakur is the Jiva Tattva, and Gadadhar Pandit is the Shakti Tattva. So all three are there. Bhagavad Gita as it is, Ki Jai, Srila Prabhupada, Ki Jai, Shri Giriraj Maharaj, Ki Jai, Go Premanandi, Hari Hari Bol.